Good afternoon. We have three of Israel's top experts with us today on this panel, and it's a pleasure to be moderating. My name is Becky Strapp, and I'm the Director of Educational Initiatives in the Jerusalem office of AIPAC AIF. It's an honor to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. In my opinion, this is the most important panel discussion that you will hear over the course of Policy Conference, and I applaud all of you for attending because we're very lucky to have three incredible people with us today who will share with us about Israel's northern border threats and the escalating tension on Israel's northern border, which I think is probably the most important security issue today in Israel. So with no further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, and then we'll jump right in. At the end of the table, we have Dr. Boaz Ganor, Professor Dr. Boaz Ganor. That's how you know we're with Israelis. Dr. Ganor, Professor Ganor, is the founder, and if it's okay, I'll call you Boaz going forward, is the founder and executive director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism and the Ronald S. Lauder Chair for Counter-Terrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. He is currently a visiting professor and Israel Institute Fellow at Georgetown, and he is the founding president of the International Academic Counter-Terrorism Committee, an international association of academic institutions, experts, and researchers in the field of terrorism and counterterrorism. Boaz has briefed and given testimony to the United States Congress and other security, intelligence, and police services throughout the world. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Professor Boaz Ganor. Next to Boaz, we have Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zehavi. Sarit is the founder and CEO of Alma Research and Educational Center based in northern Israel. She served 15 years in the IDF Intelligence Corps and is recognized worldwide as an expert authority on security issues Israel faces. Sarit, thank you for joining us today as well. And finally, last but not least, it's a pleasure to have Brigadier General Nitzan Nuriel beside me. Nitzan is the immediate past director of the Counter-Terrorism Bureau in the Prime Minister's office. He is a veteran of the IDF Golani Infantry Corps, where he held command posts in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and in southern Lebanon. General Nuriel is the 2003 recipient of the Legion of Merit Award from the United States President and the 2015 Recognition Award from the United States Congress for his long-term commitment to fighting terrorism. Brigadier General Nitzan Nuriel continues his reserve duty as the Director General of Juniper Cobra, the joint United States-Israel exercise. He's also a research institute at the International Institute for Counterterrorism, which we just heard a little bit about, and serves as a consultant in states and municipalities here in the United States on security issues. Thank you to all of our panelists for being with us today. I want to give a particular shout out to Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zehavi and General Nitzan Nuriel, who brief many of the delegations that AIPAC invites over to visit Israel. So thank you for all you do for the organization and for the country. I think many of us are aware that Hezbollah, the terror organization based in southern Lebanon, has an arsenal of over 130,000 rockets in southern Lebanon pointed at Israel. Additionally, in recent years, Israel has conducted hundreds of strikes at thousands of targets within Syria of weapons convoys and shipments of weapons that were heading to anti-Israel forces in the region. With that as the backdrop of what's going on our northern border, I want to start by asking you, Sarit, about the fact that there's currently today Iranian entrenchment throughout the region, especially with its proxies like Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, both in Lebanon and in Syria. Can you tell us what is Iran's goal?
Okay, so I will try to circle that in creating circles from the wider perspective to pinpoint what's happening on our northern front, if I can put it this way. So first, in the eyes of the Iranians, they are in a battle for survival. The Shiite population is about 15% of the Muslims around the world. So the Iranian way of thinking is thinking of a minority, and even I can say a persecuted minority. In the Iranians' point of view, the best way to defend this minority is actually to attack, which brings us to the essential idea of the Islamic Revolution, which is to export the Islamic Revolution, export this ideology of creating states or areas that will be under the influence of Iran and will be under the influence of the ideology of Iran that actually does not distinguish between the control of the clerics and the control of the political leader. It's the same, it should be the same leader in the eyes of this Shiite interpretation, specific Shiite interpretation of Islam. If I'm going to the Iranian policy in the Middle East, I want just to quote one of the Iranians officials that wrote recently that the opening of Abu Kamal border crossing, which is a border crossing between Syria and Iraq that was recently opened and actually enables the Iranians to transfer soldiers and ammunition and merchandise from Tehran all the way to Damascus. And so he said that this opening of this border crossing is actually another phase in realizing the vision of the Iranian for a new Middle East, which would include Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and actually will prevent the United States and its allies to control the Middle East. I think this is one sentence that actually describes very accurately the Iranian point of view that wants to create more influence in those countries and to push out any American influence, which, by the way, you are the big devil, American, and Israel is the small devil in the eyes of the Iranians. And if this brings me to the Iranian front with Israel, and definitely on our northern border, we are the Western front with Iran. I think that Iran wants to create one front on the Israeli, Lebanese, and Syrian border, in a sense that it will have a presence of Iranian proxies on both of these borders. And when I'm saying proxies, don't imagine Persian speakers coming to meet us at the border or fight us at the borders. The Iranians will fight the Israelis until the last drop of blood of the Arabs. Okay, so that's the whole idea. They are bringing and building militias that are composed either from Syrians, Iraqis, Pakistani, Afghani, and very little Iranians as well, that will be capable of fighting the Sunnis in Syria, fighting what was left of the rebels in Syria, but also will be capable of fighting Israel. And in Lebanon, of course, this is Hezbollah as the proxy of Iran. And though we're speaking about the northern border today, I must say one sentence about Gaza, which of course also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and even Hamas became a proxy of Iran. The relationship of Hamas with Iran today is nothing like the relationship of Hamas with Iran 10 years ago. And the influence of Iran in Gaza is much greater than it used to be in the past. And we've seen this also with the capabilities of these groups.
Thank you, Sarit. Nitzan, if I could jump over to you and ask you, what are the implications of Iran actually succeeding in the goals that Sarit just outlined? And what kind of threat does Hezbollah specifically pose to Israel?
As a result from the Iranian policy, they actually control 3 Israeli borders. By Hezbollah up in the north, by the Shiite militias in Syria, and by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. The challenge is that Israel cannot fight and win 3 fronts at the same time. Not because we are lazy, not because we are weak, we're just not big enough. We don't have enough of offensive as well as defensive capabilities. So the Iranian policy to control as many Sunni states as they can, bring them to control 3 Israeli borders. And if you understand the Iranian policy, you can very easily ask who is next on line from the Iranian point of view. And from the Israeli perspective, if Iran controlled the Jordanian border, then it's too much for us. The impact of the Iranian policy is a direct threat on the state of Israel. And the big question is what Israel should do in order to avoid fighting 3 fronts at the same time. What should be the Israeli policy in order to avoid fighting in those three fronts. And generally speaking, if I can divide between those three fronts, I will say the following. With Hezbollah, it's very simple. Hezbollah is number one on our list, and if they give us a good excuse, we will take it. Israel will not be the first to open war because of many reasons, and yet if they do something that can be used by us as an excuse, we will take it. Regarding Syria, and I can add Iraq, those who are telling you that you can kick Iran out of Syria do not tell you the truth. Iran is about to stay in Syria forever. This is the Iranian vision, to control as many Sunni states as they can. So the Israeli policy, a bit simple, to make sure that those Iranian troops or Iranian proxies will not be strong as Hezbollah. What do? Blow up everything we can based on very good intelligence. Regarding Gaza, with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, we are trying to reach long-range ceasefire, and I don't want to touch it at that stage because it will involve some politics. That's the way we manage, that's the way we are trying to delay conflict. And yet, I belong to those who believe that the first northern war, meaning a war between Israel, Lebanon, and what exists in Syria, it's only a question of time.
On that sober note, Boaz, I want to jump over to you, and we've heard a little bit now about Hezbollah, Hamas, what's going on the borders, and even a little bit beyond the borders, but we can't have this conversation without mentioning the JCPOA and the fact that the United States left the JCPOA nuclear deal and imposed new sanctions on Iran. My question for you is, will those sanctions mitigate some of the regional aggression from Iran that we've just heard about from Sarit and Nitzan?
Thank you, Becky, and thank you for having me here. It's a privilege to be at the AIPAC conference and to meet the AIPAC attendants and partners. With your permission, you're talking to Israelis, so you ask one question, we answer another question. So let me just jump in one word, because we probably will elaborate it much more on what my good friend and colleague Nitzan was saying. And I would say, just as a teaser, that I think that in Israel, we are living now in an enormous misconception in reference to the next war in the north, which is bigger than the Yom Kippur war, misconception. I leave it as an open statement.
Wow.
We probably will discuss that later. As for Iran, the current administration, President Trump, didn't shy out from the fact that he's not satisfied with the nuclear deal, and immediately after he was elected, he decided to step out of the nuclear deal, accompanying that with the sanctions against Iran. If we need to look in a retrospective point of view, no doubt that the sanctions were very useful. They actually succeeded to create a lot of economical distress and problems in Iran, which are even created demonstrations against the regime. But we should bear in mind that sanctions are not a goal by itself. Sanction is a mean to achieve goal, or goals, should I say in plural. What are the two goals that the Americans probably are trying to achieve with the sanctions? A is creating a process, a chain reaction that hopefully would lead to a revolt against the Iranian regime, toppling down the regime. Does this happen? No. Would it happen in the future? Probably not, because we are talking about a rogue regime that is not very much impressed from demonstration, not even violent demonstration. He is not shying out from the possibility of exterminating the demonstrators, shooting at them, and that's very dangerous. The other option that the sanctions might lead to, or at least hopefully would lead to, is a certain kind of understanding in this Iranian regime that they need to change their policy. Even that is not successful. The reason is because the Iranians, as retaliation, said, you are pressuring me with economical terms, we will pressure you with military terms. starting with terrorist activity, with subversive activity. I'm talking about the attacks against tankers in Hormuz. I'm talking about shooting down the American drone. I'm talking about the attack, enormous attack against Aramco facilities, the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. What did United States did as an outcome of that? Nothing. Until something happened. And this is the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Until that moment, the Trump administration attitude towards the teasing coming from Iran was horrendous. It was terrible. It was dangerous. It was dangerous to the United States, to the Middle Eastern countries, to Israel. Qasem Soleimani actually changed the whole process altogether. The question is the killing of Qasem Soleimani, which is, in my view, one of the biggest success in the recent years, is this is a secluded one case, or this is a proof of a change of the policy of this administration towards Iran? I don't know the answers. The Iranians doesn't know the answers. I would conclude by saying one thing, an anecdote. A few months ago, I was traveling in Japan, and I met a very important, prominent head of the National Security Council in Japan. It was before the killing of Qasem Soleimani, so we shared our frustration towards the American attitude in the Middle East and vis-a-vis Iran. And then I said, trying to be a little bit optimistic, and Israeli should always cling to some optimism. So I said, at least the Iranians and United States right now have the same goal. Both of them are trying to achieve a new deal instead of the previous deal. Of course, the Americans would like to see a different deal, and the Iranians would like to see a different deal. He laughed and he said, yes, you're right, both of them are trying to achieve a new deal, but they are playing different games in order to achieve the same deal. The Iranians are playing chess, and the Americans are playing poker. Chess is an Iranian game, all about strategy, long-term, and so on and so forth. Poker is all about bluffing, fake news, images, and so on and so forth. We need to see if Qasem Soleimani was another poker move, or this is a chess game that we will see in the future.
Thank you, Boaz. You mentioned Qasem Soleimani, so I want to stay on that for a moment and turn the conversation to you, Sarit. Just a week ago, actually, Israel aired on a special broadcast on its nightly TV show, one of the famous shows, a broadcast of senior IDF officials in uniform going on record, speaking to the Israeli public and talking about, delineating and warning about the precision-guided missile program that's been developed on our northern border, I'll say in Lebanon and maybe beyond that. This program of precision-guided missiles was led by and developed by Qasem Soleimani. So, Sarit, my question for you is, what are the implications of this program? Is it an existential threat to Israel? Is it going to be set back by the assassination of Soleimani? What does this mean going forward?
So first, this try of Hezbollah in Iran to create a project that will enable it in massive amount of creating more and more rockets that will become accurate, this project failed. Not only because of Qasem Soleimani's assassination, but also due to efforts that were conducted earlier than that, either in Syria or in Lebanon. Not all of them Israel claimed responsibility to, but efforts that actually damaged this process, stopped it, exposed it. In Lebanon, the Hezbollah had to evacuate some of these factories due to the exposure of the IDF to these factories. And I think this project, as a project, it failed. But though as a project it failed, the assessment are of about tens of rockets that Hezbollah and Iran did succeed in maneuvering into Lebanon, of accurate rockets, or making the current rockets accurate in about tens of rockets. What does that mean? It means that these kind of rockets can hit almost anywhere in Israel, strategic assets of Israel, such as gas rigs, seaports, airports, government offices, electricity, power plants, desalination factories, and everything I've just said is a quotation from Nasrallah's speech that presented a map of Hezbollah's targets in Israel, civilian targets in Israel, not military targets. So, and he said very clearly, we have the capability, Hezbollah has the capability to target these places with very accurate rockets. Is it a strategic threat to Israel? Well, I want to believe, since we all have to be optimistic, that the state of Israel will survive these kind of attacks of rockets, but it is definitely can damage strategic assets of Israel and pose a challenge, specifically if it's in times of war, that we will have to handle the fight in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and then also being under attack of these accurate rockets, it's a problem. Whether the death of Soleimani damaged the project, so as I've said, the project failed even before the death of Soleimani. The understanding is that, and this was the part of IDF assessment for 2020, that the death of Soleimani reduced the interest of the Iranians to carry out terrorist attacks against Israel, particularly with retaliation to these preemptive attacks that the Israelis has been doing in the past years in Syria and probably also in Iraq. So no doubt that the fact that Soleimani is gone has an operational positive implication on what's going on, but we don't know how long it's going to last. In Hebrew, we have a saying, I'm not sure it will work in English, but I will try, okay? That the cemeteries are full with people that believe that they have nobody to replace them. So, okay, it works in English, I'm not sure. But
Did everyone get that?
in Hebrew, בתי הקברות מלאים באנשים שחשבו שאין להם תחליף. This is in Hebrew for those of you who understand. Bottom line is that everybody has somebody to replace him. And the person that replaced Soleimani was his deputy. He's not the most brilliant guy, probably, because if he was more brilliant, he would probably replace him while he was still alive.
He does not speak Arabic.
Yeah, and he was his deputy, by the way, for a long time, for a few years. But we understand that these militias, organizations, they have the capability to recover. It's all a question of how long it's going to take. I think that the damage is not only to the project of the precision-guided rockets, but also, since he doesn't speak in Arabic, since Soleimani was a symbol to motivate these militias in fighting in Syria, I think this is the greatest damage. The capability of the Iranians to cultivate and to use these militias, it's under question now.
Thank you, Sarit. Nitzan, I want to jump back to Syria for a moment because we haven't mentioned it yet, but we can't have this conversation without discussing Russia's presence in Syria. And in recent years, Prime Minister Netanyahu has actually met more frequently with President Putin than he has with President Trump. And I'd like you to share with us what is Russia's objective in having a presence in Syria, and what are the implications for Israel?
You are pushing me into the political arena, which I'm trying to avoid, but I'll do it as much as I can. Let me share with you something. Russia used electronic warfare against us every time we are flying above Lebanon or Syria. Meaning they are not from the United Nations. They are not watching the game. They are part of the game. Something that creates many challenges to the Israeli Air Force as well as other players who are trying to conduct operation in those areas. The fact that Putin and Bibi are good friends mean nothing. If you judge Putin's decisions in the last 5 years, always against Israel. I cannot find even one decision when it comes into security that he took that it was good for us. Therefore, we cannot count on them. We cannot rely on them. We do not consider them as a friend. Yes, we need to coordinate some of our activities. They beg us to coordinate with them a few hours before we are taking any attacks. And we don't, because we don't trust them. And yet we are trying very much not to create any damage to the Russian soldiers in Syria. And yet, as I said, they are not from the United Nations. They took a side, and the Russian existence is something that creates another layer of complexity for us. What are the Russian goals? One goal they already achieved, getting a port in Syria. From the Russian point of view, having a port in Syria was something very important. Remember, they had ports like that in Libya and they lost them. They have ports like that in Egypt and they lost them. And Syria was the last chance. The second Russian goals is much more complicated, related to energy. Putin believes that he is the only one that can take the Iranian energy and export it to Europe. What does he need for that? Agreements with Iran, he has it. Port in Syria, he has it. Agreements with Turkey, because they are always interrupted, he has it. What was the last obstacle? The last obstacle were ISIS. ISIS was standing in between, so he couldn't take that energy by train, by pipe, or by trucks from Iran through Syria and then to Europe. Now I'm going to share with you that the American policy toward ISIS works against the American interests. What was the American policy? To destroy ISIS. I will be fair with you, I was one of the member team that sits with them and provide them some experience how to do it. But during that session, we raised the questions, who will come instead of ISIS? We all know that the vacuum exists only in the scientist experiments. In the real world, there is no vacuum. And the answer was, we didn't consider yet. Then we came at the concept, maybe it's about time to establish the Kurdish state, but they said, no, we cannot because of Turkey. So who came instead of ISIS? Iran. Very bad for us. And two players, Iran and Russia, got what they asked for. Iran got more influence, and Russia got the ability to take that energy and export it to Europe. Just to show us that sometimes a short-term policy works against the basic interest of the players. So the Russian existence is not for a day or two. They are about to control that area because from their point of view, it's crucial.
If I can add a small anecdote, those of you who will come to Alma's booth at the village will be able to see a photo that we found in the websites that a Russian is painting graffiti on a wall in Aleppo, says in Russian, Aleppo is ours.
Wow.
Okay, so just a small example to what Nitzan said.
Another reason to get down to the village. Boaz, last question before we open it up to Q&A from the audience. It wasn't that long ago that Middle East experts were writing off Assad, that was it, that was the end for him. And yet here we are, he's still in power. So I'm wondering if you believe he will remain leader of Syria, if Israel once again will actually face a Syrian army, or if those days are long gone.
My friend Nitzan explained the interests of Russia in Syria, in the Middle East, and the success that they succeed to achieve in the previous years. But this is a zero-sum game. Every success that we can mention the Russians got, it's on the expense of the Americans. And practically what we see now is an outcome of almost a decade of failure of American foreign policy, starting with Obama and moving on to President Trump until recently. What do I mean by that? The Americans, let me tell you something about the Americans, if you don't know. It's a bipartisan concept that Americans has this kind of idea that democracy is a miracle solution to problems all over the world. Yeah, we are all for democracy. We don't know any other regime which is better than that. But democracy is not a miracle solution. Democracy is a set of values, is a liberal concept, and it's not just free elections. That led the Americans, President Obama administration, to support and give back wind to what was called, falsely called back then, the Arab Spring. We refer to that as the Islamist winter, not the Arab Spring. And that actually gave birth down the road to the crisis in Syria. But although the lingo of Obama was, we are at war with ISIS, Nitzan talked about the policy of destruction of ISIS. You know who won the war against ISIS?
The Kurds.
It's not United States.
The Kurds.
It's the Axis evil. It's Iran with the foot soldiers of Hezbollah, with Assad, and with, of course, Turkey, and the umbrella of the Russians. And this is on the expense of the Americans. We have a new sheriff in town, and it doesn't come from Washington, D.C., it comes from Moscow. So with all the respect that they are begging us to tell them, believe me, an Israeli airplane cannot fly and bomb Damascus or Syria or Lebanon without notifying the Russians before. And it's a very dangerous situation for Israel. And the fact that Putin and Bibi are meeting, I agree with Nitzan, is not because they are close friends. Yeah? They have a mutual interest, at least for the time being. We don't have a shared interest in the current regime in Syria, i.e. Assad. Assad is Putin's asset. And if you ask me if Assad would stay as long as he would still serve the role of an asset of Putin. And right now, the Russians are trying actually to gain the benefit of what they invested in Syria for the last few years. And this is to build the new Syria and gain a lot of money as an outcome of that. The only one who can give it to them is Assad and Assad regime. That's why I think Assad is here to stay for the time being at least.
Thank you. I'm going to pause here so that we can open up to questions from you.
Okay, to what extent
It's not.
does this panel believe that the countries in the Mideast that have a like-minded agenda, that we all actually see Iran as the problem, will have an influence on actually reigning in Russia and, by virtue of association, Syria, to actually sit down and do the right thing?
Thank you.
I think that there is a bit of good news saying that the Russian and the Iranian interests regarding Syria are not the same. And I believe that it's only a question of time when we'll see some friction between those two players. And I'll give you an example. From the Russian point of view, rebuilding the Syrian military forces, it's very important, mainly because of economical issues. From the Iranian point of view, it's a threat. Iran prefer that their Shiite militias will be the strongest military power in Syria and not the Syrian military forces. So I believe that very soon we will see some friction based on that issue.
And we're already seeing some frictions between Syrian militias and Iranian militias. Syrian militias and Iranian militias in El Bukamal, the same border crossing that I've mentioned. So it's already going on.
Thank you.
Every year, 6 years in a row, I'm here. I hear the same two things. On the poker
But
play,
not from us, right?
no, but from everybody here. Israel's prepared to go in and do something because Iran's getting closer and closer, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months in the nuclear bomb. How close are they? And the second thing is Nasrallah.
Nasrallah?
Yes. Can't that be the next poker chip? Can't the Israelis give the information to the United States, to Mr. Trump, so maybe he could take him out?
Nasrallah being the the head of the Hezbollah terror organization.
10 years ago, approximately 10 years ago, I was invited to a building which is not that far from here. It's called the White House. And I was asked to have a discussion with a prominent thinker there, not the president himself. And he was posing a question to me. He said, would the yellow light be enough for Israel to make a decision to attack Iran? I said, look, I'm a private citizen. I'm not representing Israel, so why do you ask me? He said, yeah, I know. I ask also officially others, but I'm interested in your personal views. What do you think? Should the yellow light be enough for Israel to make a decision to attack Iran? My answer was, even a green light should not be enough for Israel to make such a decision. So we said, really? United States giving a green light to Israel to attack Iran? You think Israel should not attack Iran? I said, of course, because of 3 reasons. By the way, those 3 reasons didn't change 10 years ago up to now. I said, the first reason is, as far as I know, the Iranian nuclear facilities are scattered all over Iran, and they are underground. And you need, very sophisticated weapons, buster bunkers, and you need to attack simultaneously all of those facilities in order to destroy them. I don't know the Israeli Air Force capabilities. I tend to believe that Israel is capable to harm them, maybe badly, but not necessarily to destroy all of them at once. I know exactly what will happen the minute after this attack would occur. They would run for the bomb, and they would say, of course, we have all the right in the world because we've been attacked by Israel. I know also what would happen, and this is what we have discussed before. 150,000 rockets and missiles will be shot, 3,000 rockets a day, for how many days which is needed, and the impact is as if a nuclear bomb was shot towards Israel. The third reason I said, a nuclear Iran is an existential threat to Israel, no doubt about it. Israel should not permit and let this happen. But a nuclear Iran is an existential threat to Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, to Egypt, to Jordan, to so many Arab countries, to so many other countries all over the world. And why the hell should Israel take those hot potatoes for everybody? I said, if you ask me, what is needed to be done now is to build a new international alliance, a second NATO. The first NATO was created against this monstrous USSR. It doesn't exist today. Today, the monster is Iran. And we need now a global NATO against Iran, led by United States, together with the Arab countries, together with Israel, together with European countries, and give a nuclear umbrella to all of those countries, letting the Iranians know that if you would attack any of those countries, you are messing with the whole alliance. And this alliance actually should create a new doctrine. Instead of MED, mutual assured destruction of the Cold War, they should adopt IAD, Iranian assured destruction. The Iranians should know that if they are running for the bomb, if they are threatening a nuclear attack against any member of those states, they would be attacked by this NATO, second NATO. This at least also deter Iran on one hand, but also will prevent the nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, which is another threat that would come as an outcome of the Iranian behavior.
רציתם להוסיף משהו?
I wish you good luck getting the Europeans on board.
We don't need them.
Go ahead.
So the Brigadier General first mentioned that it seems like the reality is that there will be a continuance of these sort of neo-satrapies on Israel's northern border, right? But Dr. Ganor mentioned that he thinks that there is a misconception. Do any of you think that there's a possibility of being able to drive Iranian influence out of Syria? And if so, how?
In the Middle East, no one give up his power voluntarily. So Hezbollah is not going to disarm themselves. The Shiite militias in Syria are not going to leave. They are there in order to stay and even become stronger. So nobody is going to do it just because we ask them nicely. Therefore, Israel cannot live too long with those type of threats. And yet, if you give me two options, fighting with Hezbollah and kill them all within a month, or have another 14 quiet years along the Lebanese border, I will take option B. Not because I'm lazy, not because I'm afraid. I fought all the Israeli major combats since 77, wounded twice. This is not the issue. The issue is that we know what are the war prices, and if we can delay wars, we'll be much happier.
I think that the Israeli army has actually two missions. One is to be prepared for war, whether it will happen tomorrow morning or in the next 10 years. And second is to postpone the war, is to create effective deterrent that will enable us to keep this border for another 14 years quiet. And the big question is where the Americans are in this effort of postponing the war. You talked a lot about the American policy. I think that a lot of things that happened here in the past 2 years, including Soleimani's assassination, was actually the right message.
Only
the right message to the, I'm sorry?
Only the assassination.
The assassination, the recognition of the Golan, the moving of the embassy, the sanctions against Iran, the sanctions against Hezbollah, all of this together created the message that the United States is still behind Israel, though it is absence, and we agree about that, though it is absence from Syria.
Hi. Thank you for speaking with us. To my understanding, the reason Israel isn't taking the offensive right now is because we have superior technology such as the Iron Dome protecting us from rockets. But you spoke of guided missiles now that the Iron Dome can't take out. If they are used, wouldn't that, I mean, it seems to me the only option would be to start a war in order to prevent any civilian casualties. What can Israel and America do to prevent something like that?
And I'll just add to that, we didn't even mention today, but the Hezbollah terror tunnels, which I think many of us on this podium have actually had the opportunity to walk into 6 tunnels, were discovered on Israel's northern border over the last year. So it's not only the precision-guided missiles, it's also the terror tunnels.
I will take that. Okay, so the cost of war, as Nitzan said, is pretty high. The war will bring the damage to civilian populations on both sides, and that's why everybody is very cautious from getting into war. The tunnels, the plan was to send about 6,000 Hezbollah combatants by the tunnels into Israel to attack the communities and the IDF positions next to the border. But Hezbollah knows how to do that also above the ground. If you have been to the northern border, you can understand that it's pretty easy to cross even without the tunnels because it's all forested and hills and valleys, tons of places to hide. It's not that complicated. As for the Iron Dome, the problem of the Iron Dome is not only the issue of the accurate missiles. I believe that it can take them down, but the problem is the amount of missiles that will be launched at the same time. One. Second is that we actually don't have enough batteries to cover all the damage that will be caused to Israel. I, as a resident of the Galilee, I know that Iron Dome will not defend me and my children. I know that Iron Dome will defend the strategic assets of Israel rather than the small towns and villages across Israel's north. So I don't think that we all rely or put all our hopes in Iron Dome. I think that the Israeli security strategy is more like of deterrent and intelligence, creating the capability to trace these targets, and when the time is ripe and when the opportunity will come, and it will be no other choice, we will attack these targets.
I would like also to refer to that. Well, we don't have this luxury, I believe, to make a decision, should we start the war ourselves? No doubt that it will give us a lot of points and benefits, but it would not prevent attack, harming the Israeli home front. Let's not fool ourselves. It will be maybe an easier war for us, but it would not be easy at all in any case. The strategy of Hezbollah is to swamp the capability of the Iron Dome. And I was talking about 3,000 rockets a day. They believe that in that amount, and maybe even more than that, the Iron Dome will be paralyzed almost immediately. So the skies of Israel would practically would not be protected by the Iron Dome. At least that's what they think, okay? Now, I tend to believe that the policy would not be the policy of 2006, the previous war in Lebanon, which was, I would say, the policy of Barda, starting in the northern areas, shooting rockets against the northern, and then Haifa, and then Barda Haifa, which is Hadera, and then maybe suburbs of Tel Aviv. No. This time,
They'll fly above us.
they would fly above them,
Right to Tel Aviv.
and they would go directly to Tel Aviv. And the Israeli, that's why I say the misconception. The misconception is not an intelligence misconception. The Israeli intelligence know exactly what's going on. The public is living in a misconception. By believing that the Iron Dome would prevent that, by believing that we are facing the Barda policy, well, until it would get there, IDF will resolve the problem. And unfortunately, it's not the case. And I will tell you more than that. We at the Institute for Counter-Terrorism, we are preparing a doctrine for the home front in the center of Israel, because the responsibility for the rescue and recovery and the emergency situation is not of the Israeli police or the IDF or anybody else. It's the municipalities. The mayors should serve their own constituency when this would happen. They know that they have this commitment. They think that one missile might fall in Herzliya or in Ra'anana. We'll deal with that. We are talking about few of them, not to say dozens of them, a day. We are building now a doctrine which is preparing a bottom-up preparedness and not top-down, meaning every neighborhood would have its own rescue team, would have its own capability to deal independently with those challenges for at least few days until the national authorities can come in and help for that job. That's from the defense point of view. We tend to believe that the IDF will be preoccupied in actually solving and uprooting the problem in Lebanon itself and in other arenas and other fronts at the same time.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you for your thoughts, as sobering as they are. My question, and this was touched on lightly, is with an eye towards the future. We talked about the U.S., their failure in foreign policy up to this point, with the exception of the assassination of Soleimani, which had mixed reviews in this country. The response was very mixed. What do you see as the next...
But not in AIPAC conference.
We're pretty unanimous on that.
What do you see as the next steps that the U.S. can take in order to counter what they've missed? Is it impossible at this point? Is there anything we can do? What will Israel do if the U.S. fails to act?
I'll do it as brief as I can.
Yeah.
Let's discuss for a moment the term deterrence. What does it mean, deterrence? Deterrence means that you are setting a red line to your enemy and tells you don't dare to cross this red line, because if you will cross this red line, you will pay a price that you will not be able to bury. The costs will be higher than any benefit that you might gain from crossing this red line. That's the whole idea. The problem is that the United States, until Qasem Soleimani, lost a deterrent factor because of the two administrations, mainly because of Obama, but not only because of Obama. Qasem Soleimani is changing a different message. The question is the rivalry, is the enemy, is Iran would believe that the Americans, A, are serious in setting this red line, B, they are ready to enforce the price on Iran if they would cross this red line, and C, if they are capable of doing that. How to persuade them? That's for the American administration to think how to persuade them. I'm not pushing them into a war with Iran right now. I'm not pushing them, but I think that a message should be very clear to the Iranians. This was not a secluded event. If you'll keep on challenging us, if you'll keep on teasing us and our allies in the Middle East and other places, this is just a precedent that we will follow with other steps like that. At the same time, I would also suggest carrots to them if they would go back to the negotiation team and trying to go for a new, much better deal with the Iranians.
Thank you again for coming. My question has to do with the JCPOA. During the run-up, there are reports in the press that much of the Israeli military security establishment actually supported it. The prime minister obviously did not. It got passed. It went for a while. We have a new president. He didn't like it. He tore it up. My question to you is, based on what you know now, was Israel better off, safer with being in the JCPOA or not? What are the options for Israel now?
You have three Israelis here and 7 opinions.
Exactly.
That's what we're all here for.
You
He has 7 opinions only with me.
Yeah, okay, so you need to pick what is...
In this room, you have thousands of opinions.
Let me tell you the following, and I'll try to touch 3 different aspects of the same issue. This coming Tuesday, we are starting the Juniper Cobra 2020 exercise. I'm commanding that exercise, and I can tell you that in those exercises, we combine 3 American systems and 3 Israeli systems all together to build up a huge umbrella to protect the region. All those capabilities, I believe, will bring us the option to prevent many of the potential success of all those our neighbor state missiles. The scenario we are playing is having 3,000 rockets a day from 5 fronts at the same time. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Gaza.
Yemen.
Yemen is something different. And I believe that we do have most of things needed in order to provide better security to the state of Israel, and I cannot add any offensive steps we have. The combination between the offensive and the defensive, I believe, can give us the right chance not only to survive the war, but to win the war.
One word
Regarding,
about that.
okay.
Sorry, I thought you...
Regarding your question, I'm an operational officer. I grew up in the field, and I judge things only by how they really impact my ability to operate. Without getting into the details, I will tell you the following. When many foreign companies are getting in Iran, I can sneak in and do whatever I want. When there are not enough foreign companies coming in, it's much tougher for me to delay or to destroy the Iranian nuclear program. We all need to remember, the Iranian program exists 30 years, and they did not reach the target because someone did many things in order to make sure that they will not be able to connect it. So from my perspective, withdrawal from the deal, from the operational point of view, was a mistake.
Let me just add that, I was saying very clearly how dangerous the situation is, but I would like to calm down you a little bit. We are in Washington, D.C., so let's sit back for one moment. There is a reason why this arsenal of 150,000 rockets is not being shot towards Israel as we speak. And the reason is, A, the Israeli ability to deter the other side from doing that, and B, is the fact that this is not a Hezbollah arsenal. This is an Iranian arsenal in the hands of Hezbollah. There is a debate in Israel. Is Hezbollah is more a Lebanese authentic movement than an Iranian proxy, or it's more an Iranian proxy than a Lebanese authentic movement? And I argue...
I think we closed this deal. That's it. It's an Iranian proxy.
I agree with you.
That's it.
I agree with Sarit, but
We're done with this
100%. But in Israel, there is a huge debate on that question. And I think that we close this discussion by saying, let's ask 2 questions. If tomorrow morning, Nasrallah decides to attack Israel and wants to attack Israel, but the Iranians are telling him, no way, you won't do it, would he start a war against Israel? My answer is no. It's negative. And vice versa. Tomorrow, the Iranians are telling Nasrallah, start a war against Israel, and Nasrallah believes it's against Hezbollah interest and Lebanese interest. Would he start? He would start a war against Israel because Tehran told him so. The outcome of that is that another misconception, in my view, is that the Israeli official statements in this condition is saying, look, we will have in the next war many, many casualties, but Lebanese will have, and Lebanon would have 10 times more. We will bring Lebanon to the Stone Age, and that's, I believe, what would happen if this war that we describe here will happen. But what would deter Hezbollah? The fact that Lebanon will go to the Stone Age? In my view, the message should be to Tehran. You, the Iranians, should know that we refer to this weapon as an Iranian weapon in the hands of Hezbollah. If they would use it against Israel, we will bring Tehran to the Stone Age, and not necessarily just Lebanon.
Okay, I'm afraid this is going to be our last question. Hope it's a good one.
So
no pressure.
I hope so too. We've done a lot of talking about kinetic warfare. How do you see, cyber and the technology and the non-kinetic warfare impacting both the combat of war fighting, but also the terrorism piece of the puzzle?
Good question.
We are already there.
I have a friend that is has a company of cyber. I'm clueless about cyber, but
there is no Israeli that doesn't have a friend with a cyber company.
So, of 8200 as well. And he told me, what's the problem of us Israelis? That there wasn't one big attack, a cyber attack against us yet. So that's why we sleep well at night, because we don't know what it's like, what's going to happen. So I hope we are prepared enough. I'm not sure we are prepared enough.
In my previous job, I had the responsibility to overall Israeli protection, critical infrastructure from cyber. So I can tell you that we are in a good shape. In order to protect our critical infrastructure, we're in a very good shape. And yet, the challenges as a modern state dealing with cyber, it's all over. Mainly because the private sector and most of the services we are using as civilians are not protected enough. So the other side can, in a way, disturb our life very easily. And it's happened every day, all over. And we succeed to manage because in some places we do have good systems, and some other places the insurance works very well. So people are not really concerned from what will happen in their bank account, for example.
I want to say tremendous thank you to General Nitzan Nuriel, Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zehavi, Professor Dr. Boaz Ganor. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for traveling here from Israel. Thank you for making Israel a safer place.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.